Go.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are tuning in from today. And thank you for joining this TechStrong learning experience with A&I Solutions with Broadcom. My name is Amanda Rosani, and I'd like to welcome you to our TechStrong learning program. This session is being recorded and will be available afterward on demand. We will also be sending you a link to the recording after we conclude. Please send your questions to the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen and join us in the chat by telling us from where you're tuning in. Share your experiences, your comments, your understanding of the matter. We want to hear from you and engage with you. Any questions that we're not able to get to, we will follow up with you shortly after the program concludes. Let's kick off today's topic, which is Step into Practical DevOps with QA optimization, streamlining software testing in regulated industries. And we're joined with speaker Tim Higgins. He is the Senior Solutions Architect, A&I Solutions. Thank you, Tim, for joining us today. Can you take it from here?
Tim Higgins here with A&I Solutions. So we're going to talk about stepping into practical DevOps with QA optimization. Today, my main focus is going to be around test data, and you'll understand why as we go through these slides. Now, for beginning, like I said, I'm Tim Higgins, Senior Solutions Architect with A&I Solutions. I've been with A&I roughly for 14 to 15 years. Before that, I was a software engineer, and it's pretty much the only thing I've done my whole life. So I kind of joke and said I've been a developer since birth, but part of that really is true. Now, with saying that, A&I Solutions, a little bit about them. We were founded in 1999. We were a CA partner then and been a CA partner all the way until they got bought up by Broadcom. And now we're a Broadcom partner. And it's pretty much the only ones we deal with is Broadcom. Right. All right. So now to get started, we're going to touch on some slides. Now, I'm not going to go through a lot of slides, and I'm not big about reading the slides word for word, so you can get a copy of the slides at the end. But I want to hit some highlights, and then we're going to get into some demos. So let's start off talking about DevOps challenges. Now, we all have different perspectives of what DevOps means, right? We also have developers and operations working together, but these days it means so much more. Okay, so one thing we want to focus on is testing and testing your data. And there's always that rule of test early and test often, right? But if your data is not correct, then your testing is probably not correct. So kind of keep that as a mindset as we kind of look through these, because we're not talking about the DevOps process in general, or we're not talking about it as a whole. We're kind of just taking a subset of it. All right. Now, so let's talk about there's delays in software delivery, right? Increased project cost, compliance and security risks. That's a big one. And of course, test failures. So if we think about, enhancing software delivery, so maybe project delays, increased costs, compliance challenging, right? High quality test data is critical and effective testing process. So that one's very important to me. Think about, again, high quality test data. So is my QA data like my production data? Right? Do I have enough data? We always hear people say, well, it worked in QA, but it's not working in prod. Well, yeah, the data is different. The code may be the same, but the data is different, which makes a huge difference in your testing. So discovery methods to improve test coverage, gain insights, and maintaining compliance without overwhelming your team, sorry. And then the idea of dev and test leads, right? So let's just jump to here. Optimizing test data. So again, this is what we want to focus on, is optimizing our test data. So some benefits here is high quality test data is important for effective CI/CD pipelines. And you'll understand why once we start doing it. Automation is a big part of CI/CD, right? So we want to make sure we have automation in there, not only just in generating data, but as well as testing the data and things like that as well. And then we also want to make sure that we stay in compliance, right? That's beyond important. That's a huge thing, sensitive data, right? You hear people all the time, well, we can't test because we're using prod, and we can't use prod because there's PII data. So we're going to talk about how to get around that. Right. So, and diverse test data improves software reliability and performance. What if you're doing a performance test? Well, of course, QA is probably fine. Production is totally different because the data amount's different, right? And then implement continuous monitoring. And that's one thing that really gets overlooked is, are you monitoring what you're doing? How do you know when it's failing? Okay. So know your data. Very important to me. Again, is your test data ready for QA? Are you compliant? Test data. Do you have enough test data? So we kind of touched on all this, right? Is your test data production like? Now, to me, that's very important. There's a lot of data generation tools out there. There's even AI that does it now. But is it like your production data? Or, in other words, are names legit names, right? Is locations actual locations? Maybe you're doing a functional test with UI, and if a phone number doesn't look like a phone number, then it's going to fail. So let's think about a process, right? Everything we do is in a process. We're in a process world, right? Everything has a flow. Everything has a workflow. Everything has a process. And in fairness, it should, right? So identify, define, provision, secure, automate, monitor, and optimize. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about it. So identify test needs across your DevOps pipeline, right? Define and model test data. So we can talk about the model, and there's rules about that, right? Or at least best practices. Provisioning test data on demand. And that's really important. Okay. I've had customers say, well, we want our users to come in and request this data. Okay. Secure data privacy and compliance. Again, PII, make sure you're not only within your business, but legally doing the right thing. Automate test data integrations and CI/CD pipelines, using things like APIs to automate things. And then, of course, monitor. Again, something a lot of people miss, but you can't really optimize if you're not monitoring. How do you know what you're fixing? So defining and modeling test data. Let's talk about that a little bit. So when you build a model, the word model is a general term, right? So leveraging data modeling tools to fit best test scenarios. I always tell people, build your data model based off your use cases, or your test cases. And if you don't know what those are, we'll talk about a tool that can help you with that here soon. But you don't want, when you talk to developers, like, oh yeah, I need this. Oh yeah, I need this. I need this. Do you really need that? Right? And it may be reverse. Somebody's like, oh yeah, I just need this user. Well, they don't know all the data that goes with that user. Utilizing synthetic data generation, right, for device edge cases. So we'll talk about that. And what that means is you want to make sure you meet all your edges of your cases. And we're going to talk about that soon. But what that means is make sure you use synthetic data, right? Don't say, well, we just don't have enough data, or, well, we can't test that because we don't have the proper data. And then, of course, okay. So just make sure your data model fits your workflows. So test data on demand, what does that mean? So automate the process of test data, provisioning, right? So we want to do that, create reusable data subsets to streamline data extraction. Now that's very important. So there's a difference between cloning, copying, and subsetting. Hopefully in your data, you're doing subsettings, okay? Which means you're taking part of a whole. That's really all it is. So implementing self-service portals. That goes back to that where your users should be able to come in and request your data or the data they need. And I'll show you how to do that. Reduce lead times for availability. Now, keep in mind, this is talking about test data on demand. Okay, so what I did was I hit each of these categories, right? So we're talking about the model. Why is the model important? Why is test data on demand important? Why is being privacy and compliance important? Hopefully you know that one, right? But again, ensure robust data privacy measures, utilize advanced masking techniques. Make sure you're just doing the right thing. Like I said, legally and within your business. So automation through pipelines. One thing that a lot of people miss, especially in CI/CD, is the process of automation. Automation is very important for this. In order for developers and operations to kind of work together, you want to automate as much as you can. Not only does it remove human error, but it keeps things as smooth as possible, right? So number 2, utilize TDM APIs to automate test data refresh pre-builds. That's very important. You don't want a team to be in charge of refreshing your data over and over because, they may not do it at the right times. They may do it, partially. There's a lot of room for error there. So it's not just refreshes. There's a bunch to that, and we'll talk about that. So scheduled data refreshing. So, okay. Let's jump to the next one. And of course, monitoring. You want to make sure monitoring is kind of tricky, especially in data. A lot of this is just user feedback, in my opinion. You're testing. When I say user feedback, I mean like you're testing. So if you're running scripts and your data is wrong, right? It's hard to monitor your data because it's not like PII data. It's not like KPI data, right? Key point indicators. It's more along the lines of what's being used, how is it being used, and is it being used properly? Okay, so I'm kind of went through those pretty quickly. So let me just sum up and then we'll come back to there. Back to here, we talked about this process, identify testing needs across DevOps pipeline. So that's pretty common sense. Define your model. Okay, why test data on demand? What does that even mean, right? It means your end users can ask for that data and bam, they get it right away. Maybe they get mock data, maybe they get a subset of the data, but they get their data. Okay, it's not just purged and waiting for them to use it. They request it, they get it. Data privacy, that's pretty common sense, but we're definitely going to touch heavy on it because it's very important. Of all these, that's probably the most important one. Automate your test data, not just integration, but just everything that has to do with this process should be automated. And that's part of what goes with number 3, right? Test data on demand. And of course, monitor it. You own this data. Monitor, is it being used properly? Is somebody just wasting time with this data? So let's go back over here. Now, the one thing I'm going to use, of course, I'm going to use Broadcom's TDM to show you how to do this. And so I'm going to give some highlights of why it's important. And then shortly, we'll go into a demo. So first of all, Broadcom's TDM enhances data subsetting. It helps you with PII masking. It has a really good process. So we're going to look at that. So it can help you with your synthetic data generation. Now, I'm going to tell you, I've been doing this for a long time. It feels like forever, but I haven't ever seen a tool so robust in using synthetic data, like so open and so like you have so many options that it's so cool. And I know that's not a professional word to use, but it's the facts, right? So integrate seamlessly with existing DevOps tools. Okay, so let's move on to here. Again, test data manager, what are the benefits? So this is pretty common sense. Now, there's another part we may get into. It's called ARD, if we have time. So it will help you create your test cases. It will help you identify your test cases. Remember at the beginning, I said it's important, or I don't know if it's on the slide, but I said it. It is important to make sure that your test cases match your use cases, right? Don't just be testing just to be testing. Have a goal. Have something measurable, right? Have something tangible that you can put something on. Okay, so let's get into a demo, and then I'll show you how some of this works. So give me a second. Okay, so I am logged into a server, and this is my TDM server. Before I go there, let's go do some cleanup. And I probably should already do this before we got on the call, but that's okay. I think it's this server. You can see me from scratch. So database, we're going to pick on my med site, DB, and I have one called stage. And let's go look at the tables. So we're going to just look at these real quick. So select, give it a couple seconds to open. I'm going to just fine point this a little bit, because I don't want to do a bunch of jumping around. So we're going to say claim. This is just a fake database I built a long time ago that has to do with medical information. So therefore it's full of PII data. But again, all this is fake. So I'm running this and that's great. Well, the first thing we're going to do is talk about synthetic data. Oops, do not know what I just did there. What I meant to do is this. And we're just going to get rid of all that. Okay, perfect. So now I'm going to log into TDM. Okay, and I'm just going to log in with my top secret password. If I can spell it. See if I spelled it correctly. Perfect. I would have already got the error message if I didn't. So what we want to do is, this is TDM. This is not a TDM presentation. We're talking about these highlights that we did in the PowerPoint. So we're going to start from scratch and we're going to create a project. And we're going to call it demo. And I like to put the day's date, so I know to go back and delete it. And I have to have a description, so we'll say demo. How about we just call it delete me? Okay, now again, this is not a TDM demo. So if you have questions, obviously, ask them. But let's focus on what we were talking about just to have a scope. I created the project. It's going to take a few seconds to create it. There it is. I'm going to click on it. Whoops. Click on my version here. There we go. I was having problems clicking on the version. First thing I want to do is go down to my connection strings and make sure I have a connection to my stage, which I know I do, which is there. Perfect. So I'm going to make, so it looks like we got our source is prod and our target is stage. And I don't really care because we're not going to use source. But if you remember, the first thing we talked about was building your model. Oh, wait, that's the wrong, sorry, that's the wrong one. So let's go to this one. There we go. Threw me off because there were environments there. We're going to create a new environment, and we're going to call this stage. And I'm going to call this med stage, and we're going to point to stage because that's all I care, and save. Now, I'm going to let this run because this is going to kick off my model, okay? And while it does, we'll talk. There's a lot I can do to the model. I can dig deeper. I can dig, I can say pick these certain tables. But while that's running, that shouldn't take long. I'm just going to try to see if I can get to the slide deck. The first thing it's doing is talking about the model. So if we go back to our list, which is here, number 2 is defining the model and test data. So if you remember, I said probably the most important thing about the model is make sure it fits your use cases. That's probably the most important thing. I've been to a lot of customers and they put together all these models that are never used. But when you do that, it's actually time consuming, right? So this just finished. The good thing about the model is it can go in here and it can actually look at certain things for me. Okay, so I can create relationships. I can build this model to be whatever I want. Now, I'm going to cheat because I don't want this to take forever. And usually it won't, but I'm going to go into maybe, I'm trying to see, there was one that I did yesterday, but obviously I didn't name it good enough. I think it's this one. Yes, it's this one. So this one had the model. And if I view the model, it's the same thing. It's still stage. We didn't move it, but you can have as many models as you want, and you can name them to make sense. Okay. Now, the other thing that we did is we have to create data. So if I go down to data generators, I can say objects. And the cool thing about this, I've already registered these objects, but if I say register and I point to table, it knows that I'm using this profile stage. But what if I want to bring in objects from other profiles? Now I know the default schema for Windows is DPO, so that's fine with me. And I can see tables. But the good thing about this is I can bring in things from SQL Server, from Oracle, from NoSQL. I can bring all these into my model. So your model shouldn't be data-driven. It should be use case-driven. Okay, now I've already registered these, but what if I want to bring in a flat file, a JSON, a CSV, right? Anything I want. So let's go to generators. I'm going to click on this one. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because making these is, number one, not the scope of this, right? But it is crucial to understand because what we're looking at now, we looked at the idea of the model. The model really should be based upon your use case, and you can have as many as you want. And even if this isn't the tool that you're using, the logic and the paradigm should still be there, okay? Now, in here, I said this tool was so fascinating of how it does data generation. Now I want to show you. So we have our 3 tables. These are rules. Now, this isn't a language, but I kind of call it a language, even though it's not. But let's say if I click into one of these and do the painter, we call this the data painter. Now, this is kind of like a regex. It's not really regex, as you notice, because it has these little @ signs. I do have a seed list where I can pull stuff from other tables, which is really cool. Now, more importantly, I can link to other tables that are in my model. So when you go back to that creating your model, I can do it with SQL Server, I can do it with Oracle, I can do it with a JSON file, and I can link to those. So I can create virtual links, dependencies that don't truly have a relationship. Okay, so just validate this, give it a second. And this will give me a first name and a last name with a space in the middle. Now, some of this is really cool. Again, this is not a advertisement for this, but I wanted to show you how easy it is and what we're doing. So if I publish this, because we deleted our data, we're going to go to MedSite stage. Okay. It doesn't really care about the source because we're not using source, but what if we're pulling from a source? That is important. Now, I don't know if I still have it. Yeah, I do. So here's some of the cheats that I created. But some of these is really cool because we talked about subsetting. What if I wanted to pull from another database and I'm going to link on the column name? So you could do that, and that would be subsetting because it doesn't really care. It would just dump all that data in there, right? And there's other things you can do. Like here's an if clist first name equals Tim, then write out Tim Higgins. If not, then pull it from another table. So that's really cool. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do. And, oh, I'm sorry. And that's claim. But if you notice in claim, I'm saying, well, give me this information from this table, which is up here. So it's actually creating the relationship. That's very important in your data generation. And the reason I'm saying that, again, is because we talked about how production-like is your data, how realistic is your data, and is it very useful? Now, I'm going to put 25. I'm going to tell it to, if it duplicates, just continue, but I could say update, okay? And then here on generation, just ignore them. I'm okay with dupes, and I'm going to publish. Okay, so while that's publishing, again, keep in mind, I'm going to click here so I can see what it's actually doing. Oops, I lost it. So let's go down to let's close this, submit a request, and we should see generators. And there we go. So we can say it's running. Okay, so with this, again, if you go back to the slide deck, we talked about a couple things, and I want to make sure that they're highlighted correctly, right? So we talked about building your model based off of a use case. Now, I did talk a lot about PII, so we'll get to that in a few seconds. But if I go down here and look at data generation, where was it at? Don't know where it was. So let's go back to here. But the concept is with your data generation, you want to make sure that it is production-like data. You want to make sure that your users are looking at your test data and not realizing that it's test data and not production data. I really had customers call me and say, hey, you've got PII in our test data. No, I don't. If you look at it, it's not real data. So let's go over here. We should be done by now. Let's hit refresh. There we go, complete. So let's go see what we did. Now, if you remember our model, everything's delete. So we're going to run this, and there we go. So we have 25 records. So we got 75 showing, which is 25, 25, 25, right? And if you notice, this looks very realistic data. Now, I didn't do the relationship because that's not what we're talking about here, but this is very realistic data. The one thing we do with customers is we come in, if we're doing data generation, we will look at their data and we will try our best to make sure our rules match what's in production. Now, what's saying that now that we have data, let's go to the next part. So now we can go to PII. So if I go back to my model, okay, and I click on my model, this is make data. So yeah, let's go back to, yeah, that's fine because I don't want to spend the time to do it again. So in the model, I can say, that's okay, we'll rescan. So I'm going to rescan the PII. And we have these rules. There's common and there's US. Those are just rules of what I want you to look for. And here I can say how far percentage do I want you to look? Do I want you to skip certain things? Maybe put a max row on it. Maybe keep some samples so I can see what you're looking at. A lot of times when I come to customers, This is really what we're focused on. Now, maybe I want to include tables. Maybe more importantly, I want to exclude tables. So I can just add those there. In this case, we've only got 3. But a lot of times you may have like 500. You don't want to scan all of them, right? And we're just going to say scan. And it's warning me that it's going to be deleted. That is completely fine. Now, the scanning is going to take a few minutes. Well, probably not a few minutes. It's very fast. But it should take roughly a minute. So while it's doing that, let's go ahead and highlight some more over here. So again, we talked about identifying test needs across DevOps pipelines, right? That's pretty common sense. Everybody needs it. So we're not even going to talk about it. But identify your model. Again, that's very important to the point that I've had customers who run models forever. And the problem is they're modeling their whole database. So then we'll go back and say, no, let's look at the schema and let's get ideas of what you actually need to test. And then we based it upon that. So you should never start with your model. You should always start with your test case or your use case. Okay, and we're going to talk about that if we have time. Now, the other part, we'll get to this in a few minutes. Well, I'll go ahead and tell you. You can set this up to where it can be on the portal, and you can set up user rights, and certain people can come in and just request data. So I may have your subset data, or for an example, your data generation. We just looked at that. I may give you the right to go run your data generation, but only save the output as a JSON file or a CSV or something like that. We're talking about this now. So the one thing that this tool can do very well, oh, sorry. It's right here. They changed the icon on me. Okay, so it's done. This will help you identify PII. So if I go into here, it says, hey, we think name is a PII. Yes, you're right. We think social security number is PII. It is. Birthday, it is. This is not the right kind of state, though. So I have to say not the correct state, not PII. So this is identifying PII data. This is not masking. Okay, so it's going to remove that. So I'm going to confirm and go to the next table. Okay, our next table, name, social security, name, I'm sorry, didn't give enough time to refresh. That's our claims. That's fine with me. Now there's other things, right? I could put, this is adjuster's name. I could say that too. But I can also have it linked back to the adjuster table, right? If I wanted to. Now, again, this is the adjuster name. The truth is I would have this linked, so this one will be masked, and the claims would have the mask value. But maybe I just want to look at a little bit of data here. So let me see. Yeah, so that's adjuster name, military. That's the only thing I see that's PII. So we're just going to say confirm. I shouldn't have said next. I should have said close because that just brought us back to here. Now, again, there's other ways to view this. There's ERD, the heat map view is what we were just looking at. This is just a different view here. This is useful when you have a whole bunch of tables. It's not too good on a Mac because the way the mouse is, but I could actually see the relationships if I wanted to. But let's go back to even show just relationships. I can create relationships. There's a lot that I can do just on this one model page, but we already talked about that. We're now talking about PII. So now, after we identified our PII, the most important thing we need to do is send it for a sign off. Okay, so let's go down. That's our model. See approved, required approval. So now what we want to do is, well, let me phrase that. There's a lot of things we can do, like viewing the masking configuration. That's important. View the heat map and view the data model itself. This still needs to be an approval process. So what you have to do there, now that we've done that, we have other options, right? So I want to create an audit report, maybe. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. We'll do the masking in a few seconds because that's part 2. So I want to download this report. Sorry, I was looking at the time. So this is going to generate this report. So this is where we are here. Notice this menu is pretty active, that whatever I click on here, it will pop me up over there, which is kind of cool. But I now can take this and I can hand it off to management or whoever and say, okay, these are the ones that were PII. These tags, we'll talk about that later if it's something you're interested in, but basically you're just flagging it as PII. Once that happens, you kick it for a sign off. I don't have users, say I don't have a mail server that could do this, but now it goes off to a reviewer to sign off on it before it comes back to being masked. Now you don't have to do this. Masking is a totally different, but it puts ownership on who is doing this for those legal actions or for people who need to track, is this truly PII, who signed off on it, yada, yada, yada. So let's go back to our model. We're going to do the opposite now. What I want to do now is view my masking configuration. So that's PII identification. Okay. Now, this happens when I click on masking. And here's where I can create my rules. Here, this is adjuster name. But what if I want to see what options I have? Okay. In here, this is the name. That's just a tag. So every time I see this tag, I know what it is. Notice it's creating a copy. I can rename it. But more importantly, here are my functions. And they are a lot of them to choose from. Okay. Including the seed list that we talked about. Well, briefly talked about. Now, there's other things I can do. Start masking. I can even put a where clause, well, I won't put the word where, but user equals Tim. Okay. So that's saying where user equals Tim, mask this. So let's get rid of that. Cancel. Now, if I go into here, there's a lot of shortcuts, but again, this is not what this is about. So I have these, claimant name, and yep, okay. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do next. Now, this is no different if I clicked on masking over here. Masking has all these options that you could fill out within your process. That's why I like the Broadcom TDM tool. I call it the Swiss Army knife because it has so much flexibility, right? So next, now here, this is important. Exclude tables marked not PII, which is true, but I didn't mark any not PII. We're only doing QA, and I want to do the whole environment. So let's say if I had certain ones, I can only pick those, but I only picked one in there. So in your environments, you can have as many as you want. I could also mask and preview. Now that's important because it would show me this audit report, which we're going to look at anyway, and it would show me what was masked and how it would be masked. Now, if I go down here, I made this simple to where these names have first name and last name, okay? And all the tables, okay? So we're going to make it simple. I'm going to say next. I can download the configuration file and I can download the scripts. Now, one thing I said earlier is it's very important to do automation. So you can download these files, and this has a very nice API layer that you can automate all this process. Everything, I'm going to kick this off and then I'll talk. And yes, I'm sure. Everything in TDM has a job ID. These are called job IDs, okay? Now notice this one's running now. I did this one the other day, but this job ID can be referenced through an API. Now I can either create the API or create the job through the API and say, no, I just want to, create my own, or I can reference this one and run it again. So do you remember that whole allow the user to request their own data? You could do that through your own portal, or you could use this portal. Now that's complete. That was pretty fast. So before we do anything, let's go ahead and look at these. So this downloads this report for me. And in here, I can open up this. Now this doesn't have CSV on it, our CSV reader, but we're pretty common sense. So database, schemas DPO, table is adjuster name. My function, well, adjuster is the table. The name here is adjuster name. My function is a hash love, which hash list of values is what that stands for. The most importantly is if I look at this next one, it's going to tell me what the name was and what the name was basically converted to. So you could actually go through here and see if this is what you wanted. Now, if you did it where you said don't actually mask, then you would get the same report. Now let's go ahead and don't save that one. And again, these other ones, you can use this for automation. Okay. Again, I'm not going to get into this, but these are very good for whenever you want to automate your tasks of using a CI/CD pipeline. Let's go look at our data now. Okay, so just watch the names. I'm going to rerun it, and just like that, our names were masked. Okay, so there's a lot more that I can show over here. One good thing about all this is you have a self-service catalog. I don't really have much on here now, but remember your users being able to pick what they want. Let's see if there's any examples. Yeah, so there is one here, right? That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is use API calls. What I'm trying to do is get back over here. So we talked about the model. The most important about the model is make it based off your use case. I'm going to show you another product in a few minutes that can help you with that. Test data on demand, to me, that's kind of bottom of this list. It's not as important, but it should be something you should think about. I've been to plenty of clients where they've had one person in charge of TDM or one small team, and they're so busy that when somebody asks for data, it could take them days to get them that data when really it's just a click of a button. So again, PII, you saw how easy it was for TDM to say, oh, let's look for PII information. Now, the one thing you didn't see is these classifiers. I got to be careful because if I click on it, it will ask me to go through it, and I don't want to do that. But these classifiers, maybe I did do it, but what they do is they allow you to identify what you think is PII. So you can have your own. Now, out of the box, we have a few that you can pick from. Okay, pretty common sense. First name, last name, social security, all that stuff. Now, again, automation. TDM has a very nice API layer. So even if TDM is not the product you're using, make sure yours does, because that's where your automation comes in at. So while that's trying to load, we're going to look at another product that's going to help with these. Oh, there it goes. So here's the classifiers. Addresses, financial information, personal. That's how that works. And then when we did the PII, it tagged it like, oh, this was an XML. Then you tell the masking what rule you want to run on that tag. Okay. And that's kind of how that works. So let's go back over here. Now, when you talk about your use cases, we've got a few minutes, and I'm going to do questioning and answering. But Broadcom does have another tool for that called Agile Designer. So we're going to look at it really quick. And I'm just going to look at one that I looked at the other day, just to keep it simple. This is a mainframe. What this does is it gives you a Visio, I like to call this like a Visio look for building out test cases. So anybody can do that. So we got to start, and then we got to process, and then we have a decision. So let's click on our process. And this will just tell me it's just a data set. Test data, I can actually integrate this with TDM to have it dynamically create some variables. The cool thing is we talked about automation. This can actually help you write the code for your test cases. Now you have to put it in there, right? So there is that makeup. BlazeMeter, it used to be owned by Broadcom. I'm not sure who owns it now, but it does like a lot of good monitoring. I don't want to get into that one. So let's go ahead and close this one. But if I look at automation, this is the code that I can actually write on this mainframe test. Okay. Now that's not what it's for, but it's just one of those icing on the cake. I can build things by dropping over. Let me make this larger. Can I? Most importantly, I can import stuff, right? So Selenium, Visio, and then very important, I can export it as well. So a lot of times I'll import my test cases for something like Clarity, clean them up, and then export those to TFS for my developers. Now, oh, what happened? I double clicked it trying to make it bigger, but I meant to click on that. Now, once that is there, I can pull this up and say, you know what? Give me your best test cases. Now, I'm going to say, give me maybe, let's just say all nodes, right? And there we go. So it created these three. If you notice, I got the details over here. And just like that, we created test cases. Now, do you remember at the beginning, I said creating your test case is very important, especially when it comes to your model. So then I can take this and build a model that matches this test case. I can do the same thing for this one and this one. Now, let's go crazy and let's do all paths. And there we go. Okay. And again, this is testing a mainframe. There's a lot of benefits here. Broadcom has a lot of algorithms built into this. This product's been around for quite a long time. I've used it pretty heavily. I'm going to, let's see. I can select all. So here I'm going to just generate these and save it. That's fine. Hit OK. Had a little issue with saving, don't really care. But over here, I can see these test cases, yada, yada, yada. And there's a lot that you can do with this once you have it. If you notice, there's information down here, runs, I can automate all this. This is a bad example. So if you ever want to see a real demo of this, let me know. We can do it. The reason I said it's a bad example is because I didn't build this, right? I probably shouldn't have picked something from the mainframe, but that's okay. The point is I want to show you there is a tool that helps you build your use cases and your test cases. Now, with saying that, let's do a quick little recap and then we'll open it up for question and answering. Little Q&A. So again, we identify the needs across the DevOps pipeline. You talk about identify the use cases, right? Our test cases, the same thing in this scenario. We want to define what that means, provision them, secure them, automate this process, then monitor it, and then make changes if we need to. So identify the needs, right? It's pretty common sense what the need. Well, it's not common sense what the needs are, but you would think that this whole logic would be common sense. We know why we need testing, right? Again, test as much as you can, test as early as you can. Identify the model to be tested. To me, that's very important. The term today, especially with machine learning and AI and all that, the term modeling is really reversed, really large. But in this case, think of it as just, I need a little box of data to meet my use case. Okay. Make it where your people who are requiring this can get to that data, right? So we're talking about test cases. We're talking about QA. It may not be the same team. And 90% of the time it's not. A lot of times your QA testers are not the same people providing the data, right? So secure data privacy, obviously just, we talked about how we can assist you with your PII data. And then of course, automation. Everything that I showed you can be automated through APIs. Again, I don't want to go through these. We will share this slide deck with you. At least that's my understanding. But this is pretty open. If you want to see more, you can always reach out to us. There are more information to give you. Here you go. So you can reach out to us this way. And then I think you can also reach out to us with Cami. Our marketing is going to give us another document that I can share with you as well. So with saying that, I don't have a slide for Q&A. So yeah, I do. I guess it's this one, questions. All right, so now I'm going to open the floor for questions. So please let me know. Again, the whole concept here is make sure that you have your test data, make sure your test data is valid, make sure it's production ready. Where's that one with the questions? Because I think that is probably the most important slide deck here. Well, so important. I have no idea where it is. This one. Is your test data ready for QA? Are you meeting your PII compliance information? Do you have enough test data? That's very important. And keep in mind, one answer isn't always the answer. I had one customer who was doing data generation and subsetting. And most of the times that is the case. And yes, you can run the PII on data on the fly. So it may be non-secured in production, because 99% of the times you shouldn't be, right? I want to say non-secure is you have PII data in production, but you don't want that PII data in QA. You can bring it down. Now, if there's more you want to learn about this, I do have a YouTube channel out there where I cover a lot of this information, or you can just reach out to us. So with saying that, I'm now going to open the floor for questions. Hey there. So it looks like I have one question of, does ARD come separate from TDM? It is a separate product, but if you do purchase TDM, then you get, I believe, one or more license of ARD. You can definitely buy them separate if that's what you want. And Amanda, I don't see any more questions, so I'll hand it over to you, maybe.
All right. Can you hear me? All right. Thank you. And before we close out, please click the survey in the resources section, as your input is invaluable to us. Your feedback does go a long way here, so please do let us know about that or any other closing or final thoughts you've got. Once again, this program was recorded and you will receive an email in your inbox shortly after we conclude today's session with a link to view it. And I would like to again thank Tim for taking the time to join us. It's been a pleasure having you.
Hey, pleasure's mine. I enjoyed this.
Thanks for joining this TechStrong learning experience, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again. Have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody.